Each weekend, we spend endless hours watching our favorite teams knocking heads without a second thought to the protective equipment the athletes are wearing. As these guys smash into each other, we care more about the score than the athlete's safety. Yet because the equipment they wear is designed for protection, because it fits properly and is well maintained, injuries are minimized and we can enjoy the game. Hi, I'm O.J. Simpson, a former Buffalo Bill. As a player in the NFL, I always believed in my personal protective equipment and knew that wearing the correct gear kept me from getting hurt. Many public employees are just as dependent upon their protective equipment to perform in their jobs. To many of them, using a hard hat is as second nature as a face mask is to a lineman. This video on the proper use of protective equipment in the workplace is a joint effort of the New York State AFL-CIO and the New York State Conference of Mayors and other municipal officials. It is designed to inform and educate union members, employees, and employers in New York about the proper selection, fit, training, use, and care of your personal protective equipment. Just as in sports, personal protective equipment in the workplace is designed to guard you from dangers. Some as evident as a blitzing linebacker or as subtle as toxic vapor or smoke. The best protections, according to OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, are mechanical or engineering changes at the workplace that reduce or eliminate workers' exposure to hazards. Another good way to reduce hazards are the administrative controls that limits the amount of time workers are exposed to those hazards. Which public employees need personal protective equipment? It's any employee who come in contact with hazards at the workplace. Today we'll see all of them in action, protecting themselves on the job. And we'll hear from safety experts about how to get the maximum benefit from your protective equipment. Remember, personal protective equipment does not eliminate or reduce hazards. It just protects you from the hazards that are already there. As you review this tape, keep in mind these 5 key plays. Protective equipment must work. Protective equipment must fit. Protective equipment must be comfortable. Protective equipment must be cared for and stored. The workers who use it must be trained. So sit back and enjoy the voice of Syracuse Courier Dome, Rome, New York Mayor Carl Eilenberg, as he grabs this pass and carries us through the rest of the show. I'll be back occasionally, as will a few of my friends.
Nice pass, O.J. On our first series of downs, let's establish our game plan, understanding the theory and the law behind the use of personal protective equipment.
Public employees are exposed to an amazing variety of toxic hazards, from the fumes of a fire, to the AIDS virus, to sewage, to construction hazards, to asbestos. Public employees do all the dirty work of society.
1 out of every 10 state workers was being injured, and this was equating into approximately 1.5 million lost work days.
In 1989 alone, we had 271,000 cases closed here at the Workers' Compensation Board.
One has to understand the kind of conditions that transit workers are put under in these kind of atmosphere in the subways. People live down in these kind of areas with this noise and these kinds of dangers and all kinds of exposure to toxic problems.
We have workers who have been out from work for up to 3 months because of a hepatitis B-related illness.
The funny thing about equipment, shoulder pads and helmet, most people think that you put them on so that you can go out there and hit somebody. But the most important benefit they have is for protection from injuries.
People talk about individuals' lives who have been saved if they didn't have their hard hat on, or they would have lost a finger if they didn't have a pair of white gloves on. It's an educational job on state AFL, local central labor councils, and local unions to educate the rank and file members, whether it's in the public sector or in the private sector, to use the equipment that has been supplied by the employer.
Training is important so the worker will know how to properly use the equipment, understand the importance of wearing it, and also be aware of the consequences if he or she does not wear it.
If it's part of your job and it's going to protect you, then keep wearing it and you get used to that.
And if they feel comfortable doing their job, if they feel that they're well protected, then they can do a better job for all the people we're supposed to serve.
It's all just a piece of the pie. You have to have good equipment, have a well-conditioned athlete, and have them well coached.
The Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970 was intended to provide a safe and healthful workplace for every working man and woman in the United States.
In the state of New York, we have a very unique system. There's only one other state like us, and that's the state of Connecticut, in that private sector OSHA is enforced by the federal government. Public sector OSHA is enforced by the New York State Department of Labor. In essence of what it does, it gives the public employee of the state of New York, it protects his inherent right to have a safe place to work.
We're proud of the fact that we could get them this equipment. We're proud of the fact that we're dealing with OSHA and we're staying within those standards.
Well, I tell my fellow mayors to continue with the OSHA regulations, even though sometimes it gets expensive in a tight austerity market. However, we have to provide that type of equipment, and we also have to encourage our employees to wear whatever is bought for them.
As steelworkers representing our membership in the city of Niagara Falls, we want to impress upon them the importance of having and using personal protective equipment on the job.
The more they know about it, the better they are at the job, the better they feel about themselves by doing a good job.
Protect yourself, protect your employer, protect the economy that we have to live in, because financially it's going to end up being a burden for the entire state of New York.
In our next series of Downs, we're concerned with head protection. Just like a football player would never go onto the field without his helmet, a worker should never go to a dangerous site without America's most visible commitment to safety, the hard hat.
A helmet's very important, or a hard hat's very important depending on the occupation. For a firefighter, naturally falling debris when that firefighter is performing his duties, without the helmet, he would more than likely suffer some kind of brain damage, skull damage. To somebody working in construction, somebody working for the Department of Transportation, the hard hat, again, protects the skull and protects the brain from any type of brain damage.
We have a tremendous number of head injuries, certainly within the construction industry, for instance. And we find that when people are not properly protected, even just perhaps walking onto a work site, we find that injuries occur when people are not educated in the proper use of protective equipment.
I have a thermal barrier and a warmth barrier also to protect my ears and the back of my neck. And the helmet is a sturdy piece of equipment there to protect from almost any type of a head injury that you could possibly imagine.
Hair could fly, so we wear the hats to protect our hair from flying around in the operating room.
But probably the most important piece with the way that the game is played today would have to be your headgear, your helmet. You really couldn't be out there without a helmet. Every once in a while you'll see a funny play where somebody gets their helmet ripped off.
The helmets contain a bladder that protects it. You fill it up with air. But when they take a trip fly and they get up 30,000, the air comes out of them helmets. So we always have a checklist that they put air in their helmets. And some of the guys, when a little nervous, sometimes forget to put air in their helmet, and consequently you see them get their bell rung.
The only protective equipment that jockeys use are a helmet, which is made of a fiberglass material. It has nylon bands here that are tied by a string that, you're instructed to tie a certain amount distance away from the helmet, because I guess it absorbs a shock in a different way. And then a padding around the edges, and then the rest of it's like a black fiberglass, and you cover it with a colorful helmet that matches your colors. I personally am not that vain, where I wouldn't rather have the best available for my head, because I think I've had about 7 mild concussions in my life and one pretty severe one, and the pretty severe one was with a helmet of lesser capabilities of protecting myself. And since I've had this, I haven't had any problem with my head yet. Knock on wood.
If you can't hear the signals, you can't run the play. Ear and hearing protection is another important element that workers must understand in order to do their job properly.
Hearing protection is very important for those people who work around heavy machinery, loud equipment. You'll see them when they're working around heavy equipment on a construction site that they'll have ear protection on to protect their ears if they're using jackhammers or any type of machinery of loud equipment. And basically, it protects the hearing of that individual.
Hearing protection is important to protect workers against what's called noise-induced hearing loss, which translates to high-tone deafness. Thousands of workers in the country are heavily exposed to noise at work, And among those workers who are exposed to more than 85 decibels day in and day out, more than half will end up deaf or partially deaf after a working lifetime.
The work atmosphere that you're in, you know it better than anybody else. Nobody else understands about what it means to work down in these tracks. Nobody else understands but the railroad clerk what it means to be in this atmosphere of noise.
What kinds of jobs produce noise levels of 85 decibels and above? Well, there are many. Lots of high-speed equipment, drills, hammers, grinding machines produce 90 or 95 decibels. Firefighters are exposed to the sirens on the trucks. We did studies a few years ago of firefighters in upstate New York and found that a very significant fraction of them had high-tone deafness as the result of their exposure to the sirens.
Simply put, your eyes are your windows to the world. Employers must provide and require employees to use suitable eye and face goggles and lenses where eye injuries may occur, shielding them from flying objects, glare, liquids, and radiation.
The eye goggles, again, for the public sector people that are working in those type of occupations, in the forestry work, for example, cutting trees, anybody that might have the chance to having something put into their eye, implanted in their eye, and it protects the eye. It protects your sight.
A lot of dirt is thrown back at jockeys if you're in the back of the field. If you're always in front, you never have to worry about it. And in that case, the dirt comes back pretty fast, and a lot of times it's small rocks. A horse has an inner eyelid to protect their eyes, and obviously people don't, so we have to use these goggles.
We were picking up lathing one time, and I had a splinter, a good-sized splinter, just bounced right off the goggles, which came in handy, you know. That was a scary situation.
The purpose of goggles is quite clearly to protect against eye injury. Welders wear a very special kind of protection for the face and the eyes. You've seen them flip the faceplate down in front of them on the job. The shield part of a welder's helmet is intended to protect the face and the neck against flying sparks and pieces of metal, protect them against burns. The thick lens in front of the eyes is intended to protect them against burns of the eyes.
Just as players are often seen taking oxygen during a game, so too are workers very concerned with the air they breathe. Now, the proper selection and use of respirators protects employees from atmospheric contamination by harmful particles, vapors, gases, smokes, and chemicals.
Respirators serve several purposes. The first purpose of a respirator is to protect a worker against toxic substances in the air. And the type of respirator that a worker needs to wear to protect himself or herself against toxic substances depends upon the type of toxin to which they're exposed, and it depends also upon the level of exposure. There is a range of respirators. The simplest is the little respirator which you see people wear in their home woodworking shops, the one that's called the bra cup respirator, which is nothing more than a little piece of plastic and cloth with a rubber band across the back.
I come in contact with fly ash and heavy lead. That's why we wear the mask to prevent it from coming into our lungs.
It's very important to emphasize that that little simple sort of respirator is absolutely useless. It conveys no protection whatsoever against asbestos, conveys no protection whatsoever against chemical fumes. To protect against asbestos and chemical fumes, typically workers are given what's called a cartridge respirator. It's a full face or a half face mask with chemical cartridges that stick out to the side, and you have the flexibility to insert different types of cartridges depending upon exactly what chemical you're working with. Also, it's important to change the respirators periodically because the filter becomes saturated, and if it becomes saturated, you can have breakthrough. It's also important when workers are wearing those sorts of respirators that the respirator be fit tested. It has to fit the worker properly. It has to form a tight seal on the face. If it does not form a tight seal, it conveys no protection. Firefighters are in a very special environment because several things are happening simultaneously. On the one hand, firefighters are exposed to toxic materials in the air. They're exposed to carbon monoxide. They're also exposed in a plastic fire to all of the combustion products of plastics. At the same time as firefighters are exposed to these various toxins, they're also working in a superheated environment. They have to be protected against heat so that they don't suffer burns of the lungs. They have to be protected against smoke so they don't suffer smoke inhalation. And finally, they need oxygen. Fires consume oxygen. Firefighters are frequently in an atmosphere where the oxygen levels are way down.
Without this respirator, no way can they have even made the hallway to get into an apartment.
A respirator is that firefighter's life. It's that firefighter's capability to perform its functions. No way could a firefighter go into a building today with the toxic materials and the toxic gases that are released today without a self-contained breathing apparatus.
It's halftime, and some of the guys are hurt. So before we go any further, let's look at how we protect hospital workers and injured players from infectious diseases such as hepatitis and AIDS.
Doctors and nurses carry germs, and if they're doing an operation, it's important for a doctor to wear a mask and to cover his hands with gloves so that he doesn't put germs into the wound. But at the same time, if the patient is infected with hepatitis or infected with the AIDS virus, it's very important that medical personnel wear the necessary gear to minimize their risk of exposure.
We have to scrub, and we have to wear a mask, we have to wear our gowns.
Both HIV and hepatitis B are bloodborne diseases. That is, you contract them through exposure to blood. Dr. Vittoria Prego, who worked at Kings County Hospital, sustained a needle stick injury, and through that injury contracted HIV. And she went on to sue Kings County Hospital. It received quite a bit of publicity, and I think is the impetus for many institutions deciding that buying new, safer designed devices is really the way to go.
It's important in hospital settings to begin to use non-stick needles in order to prevent the spread of AIDS and hepatitis.
The no-stick needle is a needle that's designed to, after use, spring back and cover. It actually places a barrier between the needle and the worker. So a healthcare worker, a maintenance worker, a doctor cannot be stuck by that needle.
It's the second half. The sun is down, and when you're in Buffalo, it's getting colder and colder. That's why we always make sure we protect our entire body. In this series, we'll focus on workers who cannot do their jobs without special suits protecting them from hazards.
I take a humorous approach to police work in my movies, but bulletproof vests can often be the difference between life and death for police officers.
The vest itself can be worn in two different ways. The majority of the time, the officers that are on patrol for security purposes wear the vest underneath the shirt. The other type of vest we have that you can wear outside your work shirt.
I have two brothers. One's a DPS officer in Texas and one's San Antonio policeman. And, you know, I know when they go out on patrol, they both wear a bulletproof vest.
Policemen who were wearing these protective jackets were, you know, their lives were saved. A bullet didn't penetrate to hit them in the chest.
The most vital organ you have is your heart, and this will keep you from getting injured with pretty much anything that anybody will carry by hand as far as a weapon goes. So it makes me feel very comfortable having it on.
We all wear the high visibility vest. It makes me highly visible to oncoming traffic if I'm flagging a construction job or if I'm just directing traffic at an intersection or whatever. People pay attention to you a lot more. And otherwise, you're just standing there like anybody else. Nobody will see you.
We specifically, under the OSHA standards, which we deliver through the Labor Department, specify what type of outer garment protection is needed.
And under the sleeves here, we have a Nomex material quilted sleeve to prevent creep up, again, to avoid burns of the wrist.
What we have here is a fully encapsulated suit, considered called a dry suit. And we wear this particular suit because it's impervious to chemicals or pollutants. The water doesn't really enter and touch the body when we wear this suit.
Someone will wear a suit like this because a lot of the chemicals or a lot of the incidents that we respond to are hazardous materials. It works against any chemicals entering your skin, through your clothing, through inhalation, and it strictly protects you from any of the chemicals that are outside.
Bills wide receiver James Lofton, number 80, Now there's a man with great hands. You'll notice that he's wearing his protective gear and, of course, taking care of his hands. So should you. Gloves come in many different sizes and polymers, and if you protect your hands like Lofton does, then it's a touchdown every time.
A lot of the receivers have started to wear gloves, and I think it is because of the artificial surfaces. You can fall down, you can dislocate a finger, you can sprain it, jam it. The gloves help to almost keep it intact. You watch a lot of the defensive players, they start to take their hands up. A lot of those guys have gone to gloves too. They prevent the bad turf burns that you can get on the sides of your hands when you're diving for a football also.
The human hand is really a remarkable mechanism. It's sensitive, it's strong, it's delicate, and the important thing from the point of view of work is that people put their hands into the work they do. So it's essential that hands be protected against hazards. The type of protection depends upon the nature of the hazard. A sewer worker wears a heavy rubber glove to protect himself against sewage. A worker such as a welder working with heat and hot metal wears a rawhide glove to protect themselves against burns. Workers who are around heavy electrical equipment wear insulated gloves to protect themselves against electrical shock.
The high voltage gloves are typically used in our application anytime the individuals are working on 4 kV or above.
Firefighters wear a very tough, flexible glove which is intended to protect them against cuts and burns.
A very high percentage of injuries deal with the hands, and the glove is designed to protect them.
If you were to use a rubber glove for heat, the rubber would disintegrate as it touched the heat. You would have no protection.
Your hands have little cuts and scratches on them. Now with this glove on the cuff, we have no water. It protects the hand. It has some gripping on it, so if you had to work, you can hold tools or anything else, but also no water would come in at this time.
My aim in life is to do nothing. And the wonderful thing about doing nothing is that from the moment you wake up in the morning, you're on the job.
Fourth quarter now, hang in there, gang. We're on to the feet, my best friends. Remember, your feet will never lie to you, so protect them at all costs. Foot gear is critical to the athlete and the worker, and here are some more tips on toes.
The choice of a boot depends upon the nature of the hazard. If a worker is exposed to heavy pieces of steel, which could theoretically drop, amputate a toe, then the worker needs to wear a boot that has built-in steel protection, toe protectors, arch protectors.
These are non-skid boots that I wear for the purpose of walking across these rocks to get out and feed the sea lions.
We wear shoe covers over our shoes for also considered sterility. Sometimes what happens in the operating room, we have a lot of blood, and it can get over your feet, and then you walk through the operating room, and then we will have cross-contamination.
If a worker is working in an environment with dirty, polluted, foul water, like a sewage worker, then he wears high rubber boots. If a worker like a firefighter is going to be in a fire environment, then he needs a boot which is heat resistant and which is also going to provide protection against sharp stick injuries.
Again, a foot, just like a hand, is a very vulnerable part of the human body.
Since we've been playing on the artificial surfaces, shoes are very, very important because on the artificial surfaces you get about 12% better traction. So you better have the right shoes for the right day.
Now, when I was talking about doing nothing, that's what I do want to do, but there's a big problem with it because you never know when you're finished.
And that's it. The game is over. Let's go to the wrap-up.
It's our job now to tell the membership that to wear that hard hat or that helmet is smart, to not wear hearing protection in a noisy workplace is dumb.
That education is a lifelong process, and probably the greatest educational lesson that we can pass on amongst our fellow workers is that safety is the thing that brings the individual home at night.
We become so complacent, injuries can occur. So use your protective equipment.
Use the equipment, it's there, use it and reduce these numbers, reduce the amount of time that's lost on the job.
And everybody comes out of a winner. Everybody benefits by good safety and health procedures.
In the old days, players wouldn't wear their thigh pads. They'd get a knee and a thigh and be out for 4 weeks. And hey, if it's a Bruce Smith, we can't afford it. You might be the Bruce Smith of your team.
I think public safety for our employees is something that we cannot reduce ever.
In order for firefighters to protect the public, firefighters must be protected themselves.
But then also the bottom line that once you're trained and you're given the right equipment, that you use that equipment.
We're concerned about our firemen getting home after a fire. We're concerned about them and their families, and so is the citizens of this city.
They should not neglect this, that they should be educated of the consequences that if they do not do this.
And we see the lost time hours going down. And we attribute that to the effectiveness of the safety training programs that are going on throughout the state.
When you have labor management working together, trying to improve the safety in the workplace, you're going to get safety improvements.
We'll do anything to prevent injury and help people. And if the thing's made, only a fool wouldn't wear it.
Protect yourself. It's your job. It's your body.
New York State has a tradition of commitment to the health and safety of its workers. An important part of health and safety on the job is the use of appropriate protective equipment. It's crucial that employers provide it and that the workers use it. So please make sure you have the proper protective gear and never work without it. Thank you.
Well, team, now that we've gone through this game, I hope you've learned that the only way to address safety and health problems in the workplace is by working together. Municipalities, towns, and villages working with labor unions and you, the employee. Just like the best way to win a Super Bowl is for the defense and the offense to support each other, the best way to make the workplace safe is for workers and management to get together. Play safe, work safe, take care of yourself, and wear your protective equipment.